A lot of great talks about technology, some talks about technology and people. This talk is going to be only about people. So in case the title didn't give you a clue, brace yourselves. So first, let's see who I'm talking to. Let's have a show of hands. Raise your hands if you have in the past, say, 2 years, managed or trained a junior developer. Okay, so about 50%. Raise your hands if you have in that time been unhappy with how your junior was performing. Not that many brave people this time. Okay. How many of you think it's your fault? Nice. Well done. You can go. So what I want you to keep in mind throughout this talk is that learning is a process that happens between two sides. And both of these sides are equally responsible for the success of this process. I learned to code when I was building my startup. I never thought I would be a developer. I came into the startup as the biz dev person, and for reasons that I won't go into, I had to kind of cross over to the code side. And when I started to do it, I realized I really, really like it. So today I'm a front-end developer, and I'm also, I want to say like I'm very passionate about, but I don't think that's the right word. I think the truth is that I am kind of obsessed with the question of what keeps people out of programming and what lets them in. So I do a lot of work around letting people into programming. I volunteer teaching women how to code. I'm now organizing a hackathon for first-timers. And I guess more than anything, I just talk to a lot of people about it, like all the time. So most important thing for this talk, if you guys have any thoughts on what keeps people out of programming, come find me in the breaks, because I really want to hear what you have to say. And in the weeks leading up to this talk, I spoke to a lot of junior developers, because I wanted to know, how did they learn? How did they learn on the job? Did they have the same experiences I did? Did they have all of them sort of similar experiences? The answer to that question is no. When you asked people how they learned on the job, you will get so many different answers. Some people will say, oh, I read a really good book. And some people will say, I had a mentor and we did pair programmings, or my mentor sent me really good online resources, or I did an online course, or documentation. There's so many ways that people learn on the job. But where you start to see a theme arise, and where it starts to get interesting, is when you ask junior developers what the person who taught them could have done differently. If you ask this question, you will start to hear some similar answers. And the thing is that these answers often don't have anything to do with teaching methods. They have to do with things that are more intangible. They have to do with things that are more interpersonal. And because they're intangible and interpersonal, junior developers tend not to bring them up, because it's hard. It requires honesty. So after I had all these conversations, I realized this is not the right angle for this talk. This is not what I should be telling you. This is what I should be telling you. I want to tell you today the things your juniors won't tell you, the things they wished they could. Particularly 6 things that they wish they could tell you, and how you can use them to become better teachers. Number 1, we have no idea what's about to happen. So if you're in charge of teaching, it's probably been some time since you've been a junior developer, but kind of try and imagine this with me. Try and remember your first day on your first job. So So you're walking down a hallway you have never been to before. Maybe you just finished computer science, maybe you learned to code at home on your own, but you've never worked in a company. You've never worked in a team. You don't know what that's going to be like. And you don't know what the code is going to look like, and you don't know what the people are going to be like. You don't even know what to expect. Do you feel how uncertain that feels? If you're in charge of teaching a junior developer, don't be another factor that adds to their uncertainty and anxiety. There are a lot of things that you can arrange in advance. Their seating, their hardware, most importantly, their schedule. You need to have a plan for your junior, and you need to make sure your junior knows what that plan is. And it can be anything. So if you're having a hard time coming up with ideas, really, anything works. Can be a treehouse course, can be a JavaScript deep dive, it can be a company orientation. Whatever it is, you need to know what your junior will be doing for those first few days, and then make sure they know it too. So at least part of their uncertainty is taken away. Number 2, we don't want to bother you. So you've got a junior on the team, and you are into it, right? You want to help them, you want them to do well, you understand that if they do well, it's better for the team, and you're committed to teaching them, and you have a plan. You want them to learn from the documentation. So when they first come in, that first day, you give them a link to the documentation, and you say, please read this, and any question you have, just any question, come ask me. Then what do? You turn around, you go back to your desk, and you sit down to do your job, to work on your code. If you have a problem concentrating, what do? Put on your headphones. And your junior is not about to interrupt you and ask all of the questions they have. You see, juniors understand that you are there first and foremost to write code. We know that your job is important. And we also know, we feel very distinctly that our own lack of ability to write code, or at least good code, is very obvious. So we know how little we know, and at the same time, we really want to do a good job. And the combination of these things is gonna make us not want to ask you questions. But if on top of that, we also feel like we're bothering you, not gonna do it. So if you're serious about answering the questions your junior has, set aside a time and a place. Like really set aside. I mean, schedule it in the calendar, reserve a room, whatever you have to do. And tell your junior, on this day, at this time, you will have 30 minutes, 1 hour to ask me all your questions. And I know this feels like a bit of overhead, but think about this. At the end of the day, you want developers who are able to work together to solve problems, who are able to admit when they don't know something. And asking questions is crucial to these processes. So you need to make sure your junior feels it's really okay, that it's not bothering you, and that it doesn't make us look stupid. Because the third thing is, as it is, we don't think we're good enough. I think if there's one single most important thing to remember when you're teaching a junior, it's this. Your juniors are floundering and desperately searching Google for answers, and we don't even know what answers are good apart from the Stack Overflow score. So then we might try to implement something, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, we don't know why, right? And just generally, we feel like maybe we shouldn't be programming at all. And the thing is, least of all, do we want you to know that this is happening. Because the worst case scenario for us is that you discover what huge frauds we are and just regret the day you decided to hire us. Now, this feeling of feeling like you're not good enough or that you're a fraud has a name. Does anybody know what it's called? Imposter syndrome. That's right. And we can argue, right? This is an argument. Like, do juniors actually suffer from imposter syndrome, or is this just a feeling that makes sense? Because it makes sense when you're starting out to feel like you're not good enough, because you really aren't that good in the beginning. And that's okay. So this feeling is okay. The problem is, if it's not managed and if it's not spoken about, it can give rise to a lot of behaviors that will be problematic in the beginning and further down the road. Because it can make us avoid asking questions, and it can make us avoid trying new things for fear that we might fail, and it can make us avoid telling you when we've made a mistake. And the thing is, we can't do anything about this because we don't know enough to gauge our own progress. We don't know enough to evaluate ourselves. We need your evaluation. We need your feedback. This is so important. As often as you can, give your junior clear, relevant feedback. Now, two important things about clear, relevant feedback. It needs to be clear, and it needs to be relevant. How do you make your feedback clear? Make sure whatever it is you're trying to say is actually understood by the other side. If your idea of criticism is sulking in the back of the office, or if your idea of praise is looking over a piece of code and nodding your head, you risk your junior not getting it. Whatever it is you're trying to say, make sure it makes it across the table. How do you make a feedback relevant? Focus it on skills and outcomes and not on the person. Really. If you find yourself starting sentences with the words "you are," you need to stop and think about rephrasing them, because when you criticize a person, what you're saying is the person is flawed. Now, if I, as a person, am not good enough, what am I going to do about that? But when you criticize a skill, what you're saying is the skill is insufficient. Skills can be learned, they can be improved. So make sure you focus your feedback on these things that we can control and change. Now, there's another thing you can do to sort of help manage these feelings, but you're not going to like it. And it has to do with sharing similar experiences. Now, this is a problem because nobody likes talking about the times when they didn't feel good enough. You don't want to do it. We don't want other people to see our weaknesses. We like to think that we've always been this good. But the thing is, what this does to junior developers is that it leaves us feeling really isolated. So not only do we feel like we're not good enough, we also feel like the only person who has ever not been good enough in history. You could really do your juniors a huge service by sharing stories of what it was like for you starting out. Now, it doesn't have to be these crazy stories of all your epic failures. It can be just small stuff. When I was just starting out learning to code and building my first web app, do you remember building your first web app? It felt like anything I tried to do was just impossible. And then a friend who's a software developer once remarked in this really casual conversation that he spends about 50% of his time on Google looking for answers to problems he's working on. For him, this was just an offhand comment, but for me, it was huge because it made me realize that what I was going through was okay, and that if I kept going, I would get better. So share with your juniors some of the stories of the things that happened to you as a beginner. You can really help them out a lot. Number 4, we get bored too. We want to do a good job. We want to take the tasks you give us and do our best at them and get good results and make you see that we are a good addition to the team. And we understand that we need to start small, maybe with the more menial tasks, maybe with the jobs other people don't want to do. That's okay. Everybody's got to start somewhere. But we also don't love doing the same task over and over again. We also enjoy challenge in our work. Maybe that's one of the reasons we wanted to become developers in the first place. So when all you have us doing are the same repetitive tasks again and again, we get bored. And what's more is, we don't learn. So I'm going to talk about the 10,000 hour rule. I know it's controversial. I'm going to assume most of you know it, but let me just recap so that we're all on the same page. The 10,000 hour rule states that in order to become a master at anything, you need to put in 10,000 hours of practice. Okay, that's what most of us know, but there's actually a second part to that rule, which for some reason gets mentioned far less often, which is you need to put in 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. Deliberate practice means that at each and every point in time, you're working at a level slightly higher than you had been before. If you think about it, this makes sense, right? When you're constantly doing tasks that are more difficult and complex, at the end of the day, you'll be doing the most complex, difficult tasks. So when you have your junior doing the same thing over and over again, you may be sparing them feelings of frustration and failure. You're probably sparing yourself the time and energy it would take to walk them through more complicated tasks, but you're not helping them learn. In order to learn, we need to be constantly out of our comfort zone. We need deliberate practice. So make sure the tasks you give your juniors are always slightly different or more difficult than they've had so far. Now, I think we saw actually an interesting example, what I believe could be an interesting example of this practice in Leah's talk today, when she spoke about developers not feeling comfortable with JavaScript. Because if you have your juniors doing HTML for the first 6 months on the job, they're not going to know JavaScript. So make sure you give them some of these more advanced tasks so they learn how to do them. Number 5, we know what you think of us. Guys, let's just get it out in the open, okay? We know you're sometimes frustrated with us. We know you're sometimes unhappy with how we're doing. We know you don't always have the time and the energy for us and our questions and our mistakes and our breaking things. We understand. Look, it's okay. You're human, right? You don't always have to be some paragon of patience. Thing is, we also know when you think worse stuff about us. We know when you think we're stupid. We know when you think we're lazy. We know when you think we're not cut out for this. And if we see you thinking that too often, we're gonna start thinking it too. See, we believe you. We don't believe ourselves. We don't trust our own judgment, but we're pretty sure you know what you're talking about. So if you don't think we can do it, we'll take your word for it over our own. And no, it doesn't matter if you don't tell us what you're thinking. It doesn't matter if you don't tell anyone what you're thinking. If you're thinking it, you will communicate it in a million small ways, and we will know. And the truth is, I don't believe there's any good solution to this problem. If you don't believe in someone, you shouldn't be teaching them. Because if you're thinking young developers only want quick fixes all the time, what your junior will learn is that they're lazy and shallow. If you're thinking, women, am I right? No. They're just not as good at solving problems rationally. Your junior will learn she's not a good problem solver. If you think your junior has any inherent quality that fundamentally prevents them from becoming a good developer, they will learn that from you, and they will do it faster and more deeply and more permanently than any coding best practice. I know. I've seen this happen. So if you don't believe in the person you're teaching, consider recusing yourself from that job and passing them on to someone who has more faith in them. Number 6, we can only be as good as you are. So I'm going to tell you a story about a mistake I made at work. It was a pretty big mistake. You could say I deleted a database. Now, when I realized what happened, I just jumped out of my chair and went running through the office and tried to find someone who will help me fix this. And it was early in the morning, so most people hadn't arrived, and the one person who was there was the head of R&D. And I was so panicked that I ran into his room and just said, I screwed up. He looked at me and asked what happened, and I told him, and he said, okay, let's call DevOps. And DevOps said he'll be coming in soon, and that he thinks he can fix this, and as far as the head of R&D was concerned, that was okay. As far as I was concerned, it was not okay. I didn't know what the system was like, and I didn't know who else could be affected by what I'd done, and I was generally horrified. So I sent a message to my team leader and told him about it and asked him if I needed to tell anyone else. And my team leader said, look, DevOps says he's coming in, he thinks he can fix it, let's just wait for him. And so I was sat down back in my chair, kind of just visibly shaking. And DevOps came in a few minutes later. I spent the next 30 minutes in agonizing uncertainty, and it turned out he could fix it, and it was okay. Now, some of you are laughing. I don't know if any of you have ever done this, deleted a database. But I can't even begin to describe to you the horror of that morning. I was just sitting there in my chair thinking, how could I have made such a stupid mistake? But at no point in that time did any of my superiors make me feel like my mistake was stupid or inexcusable or going to get me fired. It's one of the most important, strongest lessons I learned about what it means to be a good developer. You shape how we see the world. Remember, we've never worked anywhere before. We don't have a good, clear mental image of what a developer can or should be. We have you. And human beings learn through copying. It's one of the most natural ways for us to learn. A baby trying to speak is basically mimicking her parents until she can create the same sounds they do. And this is not something we do consciously, it just happens. It'll happen throughout our whole life. I bet it's happened to you too. We learn through copying. We will learn through copying on the job. So, if you are one of these developers who works crazy hours, we will copy you. And we will come to believe that's what makes a good developer. If you are curious and excited about new technologies, we will copy you. And we will come to believe that's what makes a good developer. If you are a team player, we will do that. If you are a lone wolf, we will do that. Whatever you are. You know, if you're a harsh critic, if you are adventurous, if you're innovative, if you're a robot, you kind of set the limits of what we believe we can become. So think about what you believe makes a good developer. Think about what you want us to be, and then be that. We will copy you. So I hope I've given you a bit of insight into what's going on in your juniors' heads. I hope you can take some of these things and implement them the next time you need to teach someone. And more than anything, I hope that when you go back to work tomorrow, you'll try putting yourselves in the shoes of the person you're training. What would they tell you? You know, if they thought they could tell you anything. How can you use that to become a better teacher? Remember, I told you I am obsessed with what keeps people out of programming. You are the gatekeepers. You've been given this truly awesome job of shaping another person. So make sure you use that wisely. Now, I have a few more minutes, and I did notice that not everyone here is a senior developer, not everyone here is in charge of teaching someone else. I'm gonna hazard a guess that there are some junior developers in the audience. Where are my juniors at? No. I do want to say 3 quick things for junior developers to keep in mind when you're learning on the job. This is not on the presentation. I'm sorry, I can add it later if you want to have it. Number 1, work hard. Excellence is not something you're born with, not even excellence in programming. It doesn't matter what people tell you. You know, if you have talent and you don't work at it, that's called potential. So make sure you work your hardest to become the best developer you can become and to give back to the person on the other side who is doing their best to teach you. Number 2, it is your job to learn. When I was preparing for this talk, I did a lot of online research. I wanted to see what people were saying about their experiences teaching on the job. And I found a Stack Overflow thread. It has since then been closed, because you don't talk about that stuff on Stack Overflow anymore. But there was a thread about it, somebody asking, how can I teach my juniors, what's the best way? And he got a lot of answers. And one of the answers was from a junior developer saying, my boss doesn't pay me to learn. It got a lot of downvotes. Juniors, your bosses are paying you to learn. It's part of your job. You need to be focused while you're doing whatever tasks you have to do. You also need to make sure you have time to get better. If you don't have this time, consider walking up to your boss and asking for it. By the way, I think it's a developer's job to always learn. It doesn't matter if you're a junior or a senior or what stage of your career you're at. You should always be learning. And then the third thing, we talked a bit about imposter syndrome. Did you know there is something that is the opposite of imposter syndrome? It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And what it is basically, it says that when you're new to something and you know very little, you end up thinking you know a lot because you just don't know how much more there is to know. I should have had a slide with this because I'm doing the hand gestures. So some people that are beginning actually think they know a lot because they're just unaware of how much more there is out there to learn. So if you're a junior developer and you're sitting in the audience looking at this presentation kind of thinking, nah, that doesn't happen to me. I don't know you. I don't know how good you are. But you should know that the opposite of the imposter syndrome also exists. Thank you. Woo!